Hi, I'm going to be giving you a quick lesson on A-level politics. The topic we're going to be covering today is liberalism. So what is liberalism? Liberalism is a political philosophy or worldview founded on the ideas of liberty and equality. Liberals espouse a wide variety of views depending on their understanding of these principles, but generally they support programs such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, free markets, civil rights, democratic societies, secular governments, gender equality, and so on. And so where does liberalism come from? In Europe, liberalism has a long tradition dating back to the 17th century. Scholars often split those traditions into British and French versions. Words such as liberal, liberty, libertarian, and libertine all trace their history to the Latin liber, which means free. One of the first recorded instances of the word liberal occurs in 1375, when it was used to describe the liberal arts in the context of an education desirable for a free-born man. But liberalism as we know it today can trace its roots back to the Age of Enlightenment, when it became popular amongst philosophers and economists in the Western world. Liberalism rejected the prevailing social and political norms of hereditary privilege, state religion, absolute monarchy, and the divine right of kings. The 17th century philosopher John Locke is credited with founding liberalism as a distinct political philosophy. Locke argued that each man has a natural right to life, liberty, and property, while arguing that governments must not violate these rights based on a social contract. Liberals opposed traditional conservatism and sought to replace absolutism in government with representative democracy and the rule of law. So leaders in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, the American Revolution of 1776, and the French Revolution of 1793 used liberal philosophy to justify the armed overthrow of royal tyranny. It was after the French Revolution that liberalism started to spread more rapidly. So 19th century liberalism. The 19th century saw liberal governments established in nations across Europe and South America. It was well established alongside republicanism in the United States. Before 1920, the main ideological opponent of classical liberalism was conservatism, but liberalism then faced major ideological challenges from new opponents, fascism and communism. In the 20th century, liberal ideas spread even further as the liberals found themselves on the winning side of both world wars. 15 years after the end of the Second World War, the liberal and democratic identity of Western Europe had been reinforced on almost all sides by the definition of the West as a place of freedom. Set against the oppression in the communist East, by the slow development of a greater understanding of the moral horror of Nazism, and by the engagement of intellectuals and others with the new states and social and political systems emerging in the non-European world to the south. As a consequence, liberal values were acquiring a wider currency, transcending the limited contours of liberal parties and electorates, and becoming part of how Western Europeans recognized and communicated with each other. In Europe and North America, the establishment of social liberalism became a key component in the expansion of the welfare state. Today, liberal parties continue to wield power and influence throughout the world. However, liberalism still has its challenges to overcome in Africa and Asia. The fundamental elements of contemporary society have liberal roots. The early waves of liberalism popularized economic individualism while expanding constitutional government and parliamentary authority. So what has liberalism achieved? One of the greatest liberal triumphs involved replacing the capricious nature of absolute royal rule with a decision-making process encoded in the written law. Liberals sought and established a constitutional order that prized important individual freedoms, such as the freedom of speech and of association, an independent judiciary, and public trial by a jury, and the abolition of aristocratic privileges. The expansion and promotion of free markets was another major liberal achievement. Before they could establish markets, however, liberals had to destroy the old economic structures of the world. In that vein, liberals ended mercantilist policies, royal monopolies, and various other restraints on economic activities. They also sought to abolish internal barriers to trade, eliminating guilds, local tariffs, the commons, and prohibitions on the sale of land along the way. Later waves of modern liberal thought and struggle were strongly influenced by the need to expand civil rights. And liberals have advocated gender equality and racial equality, in their drive to promote civil rights and the global civil rights movement in the 20th century, achieved several objectives towards both goals. So in the Americas, in North America, unlike Europe and Latin America, the word liberalism is almost exclusively used to refer to social liberalism. The dominant Canadian party is the Liberal Party, and the United States, the Democratic Party, are usually considered liberal within the states, but conservative by European standards. I hope you found this useful.